There's a moment on the spiritual path that no one talks about. A moment when you've already read the books, listened to the podcasts, practiced the rituals, repeated the affirmations, and yet the deeper truth is this. Your life still feels strangely stuck. Not broken, not chaotic, just quietly stuck, like a door that should open but only moves a few inches before something inside resists. It's the kind of stuckness you only notice at night, when the noise fades, when you stop performing the person you think you should be, when there's nothing left to distract you from the truth humming beneath your thoughts. And here's the part that hurts. You don't know if you're closer to awakening, or if you've simply become better at pretending. Carl Jung warned about this exact moment. The moment when the unconscious begins to knock, softly at first, and then louder, until the sound becomes impossible to ignore. He believed that the greatest obstacles to awakening are never out there. They are inner architecture, built quietly, brick by brick, by the parts of you that are terrified of what awakening might demand. Because awakening isn't just light. It's loss. It's surrender. It's the collapse of identities that once felt safe, even if they kept you small. And what if the reason you feel stuck is not because you're failing, but because you're standing at the threshold where something must finally be released? The truth is, there are 7 silent forces that block spiritual awakening. 7 psychological patterns that Jung recognized long before the modern world wrapped spirituality in glitter and easy hope. 7 invisible weights that make you feel like you're trying to run underwater. Most people never identify these blocks. Most people never escape them. But if you can name them, really name them, something inside you begins to shift. A doorway opens. The unconscious responds. The path clears in a way that feels less like effort and more like alignment. So in this video, we'll confront the 7 things that may be quietly blocking your awakening. Not to judge them, but to understand them. Because awareness itself is the beginning of transformation. The first thing blocking your awakening is something so normal that people almost never see it as a problem. Numbing the inner noise, the quiet addiction to distraction. It looks innocent. You're tired, you pick up your phone. You're anxious, you open another tab. You feel a strange emptiness. You binge a new series, scroll through spiritual content, watch one more video where someone explains the meaning of your pain for you, so you don't have to feel it directly. Carl Jung would say, when we avoid the inner world, the unconscious doesn't disappear. It simply finds more dramatic ways to be heard. Every notification, every endless scroll, every background noise becomes a shield between you and the one thing that actually wants to speak, your own soul. You tell yourself you're learning, you're researching, you're staying informed. But if you're honest, you know this. Most of the time, you're just trying not to be alone with your own mind. Numbing doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks productive. Overworking, overplanning, endlessly organizing your life so you never have to sit with the rawness of what you truly feel. The screen becomes a modern ritual of avoidance, and the tragedy is that you can spend years orbiting around awakening without ever landing in the truth of your inner life. Jung believed that the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche, speaks in symbols, dreams, subtle moods, strange longings. But for that language to reach you, something radical has to happen. There must be silence. Not just outer silence, but inner space, a moment in which you are not entertaining yourself, not curating an image, not running away from the discomfort of being real. So ask yourself gently, how much of your day is spent truly present? And how much is spent sedated by small, shiny, endless distractions? Because the first step of awakening is not some grand revelation. Sometimes it's as simple and as terrifying as closing the app, turning off the noise, and allowing the inner voice you've been avoiding to finally be heard. And when that happens, another layer of truth appears, one that reveals the second block. What happens when the mask you use to face the world becomes more real than you? The second thing blocking your awakening is subtle and dangerous. Worshipping the persona, when your spiritual self becomes just another mask. Jung called the persona the social mask we wear to survive in the world. We need it, to work, to relate, to function. But it becomes a prison when the mask is no longer something you use. It's something you believe you are. In the spiritual world, this mask can be incredibly seductive. You become the calm one, the wise one, the one who understands everything. You speak beautifully about energy, alignment, trauma, boundaries. People admire your insight. They come to you for advice. On the outside, you look awake. On the inside, you still feel profoundly divided. This is how worshipping the persona blocks your awakening. You begin to invest more energy in protecting the image of being conscious than in actually being honest with yourself. You hide your anger because it doesn't fit the enlightened image. You hide your jealousy because it feels too low vibration. You hide your fear because someone like you should have already transcended that. Jung would say, whatever you push into the shadow doesn't vanish, it gathers power. So while you polish your spiritual persona, your unlived emotions collect interest in the dark, waiting for the moment they'll erupt in ways you can't control. The tragedy is that this mask is often rewarded. People praise your strength, your calm, your apparent clarity, and every compliment becomes another layer of armor. You start to feel that if you showed your confusion, your contradictions, your unresolved pain, you would lose love, status, credibility. But awakening isn't a performance. It's not a role. It's the opposite. It's the slow, sometimes painful process of letting the mask crack enough for your real face to finally breathe. So if you recognize yourself in this, don't condemn yourself. Simply notice. Where am I trying to look awake instead of daring to be real? Where do I censor my truth so I can maintain the image of the spiritual one? Because the moment you stop worshipping the persona and start befriending what lives behind it, something shifts. And that shift will expose the third block. The way you trust external voices more than the quiet, inconvenient truth of your own inner guidance. The third thing blocking your awakening is subtle and deceptively harmless. Chasing external voices instead of listening to your inner one. And the truth is, you already know how this feels in everyday life. You're about to make a decision, big or small, and instead of pausing, breathing, and checking in with yourself, you grab your phone. You search for a video. You look for a sign. You scroll through spiritual pages hoping that a quote, a post, or a tarot reading will decide for you. Or maybe it's more ordinary. You're sitting in a cafe, hesitating over a message you want to send. Your gut already knows the answer. That you shouldn't text that person, that you shouldn't say yes to that invitation, that something feels off. But instead of trusting that instinct, you ask 3 friends what they think. And each answer pulls you a little further from your own truth. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when the collective mind becomes louder than the inner self. The moment when your intuition becomes a faint signal drowned out by the noise of opinions, trends, algorithms, and generic spiritual advice. It's not that seeking wisdom is wrong, it's the dependency that kills you. The quiet belief that someone else knows better than your own soul. And this dependency has consequences. Your intuition becomes shaky. Your sense of direction weakens. You begin to feel confused, indecisive, fragmented. Not because you lack clarity, but because you've abandoned your inner authority. Jung believed the self communicates in whispers, subtle pulls, symbolic images, an inner yes or no that appears in the body before the mind explains it. But you can't hear whispers when you're drowning in noise. So ask yourself, how many decisions in your life are truly yours? And how many are echoes of the voices you've allowed in? Because when you finally reclaim your inner voice, even in small everyday choices, something shifts. And that shift reveals the fourth block. The way spirituality can become not a path to awakening, but a strategy to avoid the darkness you're terrified to face. The fourth thing blocking your awakening is one of the most invisible traps on the path. Turning spirituality into escape, the spiritual bypass Jung would quietly, but firmly call out. On the surface, it looks like growth. You talk about forgiveness, higher frequency, positive thinking, letting go. You repeat that everything is light, that it's all love, that negative emotions are lower vibration. People admire how peaceful you seem. But then, real life happens. Someone crosses a boundary. You feel anger rise in your chest, sharp, hot, honest. Instead of listening to it, you shut it down with a quote about compassion. You feel jealousy or insecurity or fear in a relationship. Instead of asking, "What is this trying to show me?" you say to yourself, "If I were truly spiritual, I wouldn't feel this. I should just send love and move on." You're exhausted, depleted, on the edge of burnout. Instead of admitting, "I'm not okay," you tell yourself that the universe has a plan, and you avoid the harder step of setting boundaries, saying no, or changing what's slowly killing your energy. This is spiritual bypassing. Using light to avoid looking at your own darkness. Using lofty concepts to avoid the raw, messy, uncomfortable reality of what you actually feel. Jung warned that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. He knew that the emotions you avoid do not disappear. They sink. They go underground. They become shadow. And the shadow doesn't stay quiet forever. So you think you're above anger until it explodes in a passive-aggressive comment you didn't plan to say. You think you've transcended sadness until your body collapses into a depression you can't explain. You think you're too awakened to feel envy until you quietly resent everyone who seems freer than you. Spiritual bypass blocks awakening because it replaces integration with performance. You try to act like someone who is already healed, instead of allowing yourself to be someone who is still in the middle of healing. Awakening doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be honest. So the next time you feel something unspiritual, try this. Instead of pushing it away, sit with it for a moment. Name it. Ask it what it's trying to protect. Treat it as a messenger, not a failure. Because when you stop using spirituality to escape your own humanity, a new kind of courage appears. And that courage will lead you straight into the fifth block. The way your fear of upsetting others quietly chokes the voice of your own soul. The fifth thing blocking your awakening is subtle, polite, and devastatingly common. Saying yes when your entire inner world is already screaming no. You see this in everyday life. You accept the invitation you don't have energy for because you don't want to seem distant. You offer help even when your body feels heavy because you don't want to be selfish. You stretch yourself thinner and thinner. One more task, one more favor, one more conversation. Even as something inside you whispers, "You don't have space for this." From the outside, it looks like kindness. Inside, it's self-abandonment. Carl Jung described this dynamic as a split in the psyche. The outward self doing one thing while the inner self pleads for another. In modern terms, therapists like Gabor Mate and internal family systems psychologists call this self-betrayal in microdoses. Tiny moments where you choose external peace over internal truth. 1 or 2 times is manageable. A lifetime of it becomes a quiet psychological death. When you say yes while your inner world screams no, your body keeps the score long before your mind admits it. Your shoulders tense. Your breath shortens. Your voice softens even though your chest tightens. Your soul contracts. And then the symptoms begin. Resentment toward people you never set boundaries with. Fatigue that no amount of sleep fixes. A numbness you can't explain. Or that pulsing sense of being drained by life instead of nourished by it. It's not that you're weak. It's that you've been trained socially, culturally, and emotionally to protect relationships at the cost of protecting yourself. But awakening requires something different. It requires loyalty to your own inner signals. Made often says that the opposite of sensitivity isn't strength, it's self-disconnection. You can't awaken while severing the link to your deepest instincts. You can't follow the path of the self if you silence the very voice meant to guide you. So the real question is simple and radical. Where in your life are you still saying yes out of fear, habit, or guilt instead of truth? Because once you stop abandoning yourself in small doses, something extraordinary happens. You gain the strength to face the next silent block, the one that keeps you trapped in versions of your life that ended long ago. The sixth thing blocking your awakening is not just about circumstances. It's about grief, about the quiet terror of endings, about refusing to let things die, staying attached to versions of your life, your identity, and your relationships that already ended inside you long before they ended outside. You can feel this in your body long before your mind admits it. You wake up with a heaviness you can't explain, dragging yourself into a job that once excited you, but now feels like wearing clothes that no longer fit. You stay in a relationship where your laughter has grown quieter, where conversations feel forced, where the connection is mostly memory, but you cling to the history, to the photos, to the idea of what you used to be together. You scroll through old messages, playlists, places, pretending you're just remembering, when in truth, you're trying to keep something alive that doesn't naturally breathe anymore. On the surface, it looks like loyalty. But inside, it feels like this low, constant ache, a subtle resentment toward your own life, a quiet jealousy of people who allowed themselves to start over. These attachments often come with conflicting feelings. Guilt. How can I leave? I owe them. I owe this place. I owe this version of me. Fear. What if there's nothing better? What if I let go and regret it? What if this was my only chance? Shame. A stronger person wouldn't feel like this. I should be grateful. Other people have less. Nostalgia. But we had such good times. Maybe I'm just being dramatic. Maybe I should try harder to make it feel like it did before. Jung saw this as a refusal to undergo the symbolic deaths the psyche requires. The old self must die in some way so the new one can emerge. But the ego hates death, even when it's just symbolic. And contemporary therapists like Francis Weller speak of unlived grief. All the endings we never allow ourselves to fully feel, all the goodbyes we never consciously say. Unlived grief doesn't vanish. It turns into stagnation. You start feeling like your life is paused. Days blur together. You feel strangely absent from your own story, as if you're walking through a script that no longer belongs to you. You find yourself daydreaming about another life. A city you never moved to, a career you never dared to pursue, a version of you that is braver, clearer, more aligned. Yet when the moment comes to actually change something, your chest tightens. Your mind floods you with what-ifs. Your nervous system screams that staying in the discomfort you know is safer than risking the unknown you can't predict. This is how attachment becomes a spiritual block. You can't walk through a new door while both hands are gripping the old one. Awakening asks you to do something that feels deeply unnatural to the ego, to allow certain things to end on purpose before life rips them away in more brutal ways. Not with coldness, but with reverence. Not in denial, but in conscious grief. Letting yourself mourn the relationship that never became what you hoped, the career that no longer matches your soul, the identity you outgrew, the version of you that played small to stay loved. So ask yourself, gently but honestly, where am I staying out of habit, not love? What am I holding on to because I am afraid of the emptiness that might come after letting go? What feels dead inside me, but I'm still forcing to look alive on the outside? Because here's the paradox Jung understood. When you finally allow something to die in your life that is already dead in your soul, the emptiness you fear doesn't stay empty forever. Something new begins to move there, slowly, quietly, like the first green after winter. And it's often in that raw, exposed, honest space that you discover the seventh block. The temptation to turn spiritual awakening into a status, a label, a trophy for the ego, instead of letting it remain what it truly is, a living, humble, ongoing journey. The seventh thing blocking your awakening is subtle, seductive, and often invisible until it's already taken root. Treating awakening as a status, instead of a living, humbling, lifelong journey. This is the most dangerous block because it feels like progress. It feels like superiority, clarity, expansion. It feels like finally being the one who gets it. But what looks like elevation is often just the ego wearing a spiritual crown. You see this in ordinary moments, not grand gestures. You read a post and think, I'm beyond this now. You watch someone struggle with something you've already worked through and feel a quiet, smug distance. You catch yourself comparing your level of consciousness to others like a private scoreboard only you can see. Or you expect life to reward you because you've been doing the inner work. And when reality doesn't cooperate, resentment boils under the surface. This turns awakening into an identity. And once awakening becomes an identity, it stops being awakening. Jung warned about this through the concept of inflation. When the ego expands by merging with something larger than itself. In modern psychology, therapists like Richard Schwartz call it spiritual manager mode. The part of you that uses spirituality to control how you appear rather than transform who you are. And you feel this block internally. You become less curious and more certain, less open and more rigid, less compassionate and more judgmental, even if only inside your own mind. You start to speak like someone who's already arrived, even though the journey is far from over. It's not always arrogance. Sometimes it's fear that if you stop being the awakened one, the pain you've avoided will come rushing back. Sometimes it's insecurity masked as wisdom. Sometimes it's simply exhaustion, projecting enlightenment because you don't want to admit you're still hurting. The tragedy is that treating awakening as a status prevents the very thing you want. Growth, depth, intimacy with your own soul. Real awakening isn't a pedestal, it's a practice. It's the courage to stay honest, to stay porous, to stay teachable, to admit when you don't know, to admit when something still hurts, to admit when you've slipped back into old patterns and need to begin again. If you want to know whether awakening is alive in you, ask yourself this. Am I becoming more human or more performative? Because genuine awakening makes you softer, not harder. More humble, not superior. More honest, not impressive. And when you let go of the need to look awakened, you return to the truth that has always been there. The truth Jung, modern psychology, and every spiritual lineage points to. Awakening is not a destination. It is a relationship with your shadow, your intuition, your past, your emotions, your humanity. A relationship you return to again and again, not because you've mastered it, but because it keeps revealing who you are becoming. When you put these 7 blocks side by side, you notice something simple and undeniable. Every one of them is a way of turning away from yourself. Some through distraction, some through masks, some through fear of endings or fear of honesty, some through the subtle pride of wanting to look awakened instead of being willing to stay human. But seeing these patterns is not a failure. It's the doorway. Jung believed that the moment you bring something to consciousness, it begins to lose its power, and that's what's happening right now. If one of these blocks spoke to you, or if all of them did, that recognition is the beginning of awakening. So take a breath. Let this clarity settle in your body. and allow yourself to move forward with a little more truth, a little more courage, and a little less self-abandonment. And if you want to keep walking this journey with me, exploring Jung, shadow work, intuition, and the deeper psychological layers of awakening, make sure to subscribe, leave your like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. In the next video, we'll go even deeper into the hidden mechanics of the psyche, the parts of you that protect, sabotage, confuse, and ultimately guide your transformation. Until then, honor your truth, honor your inner voice, and remember, awakening isn't something you achieve, it's something you return to.